Test.
Good evening, everyone. It's 5:30, and I will go ahead and call this policy meeting to order. Ms. Shope, could I have a roll call, please?
Yes. Greg Schneider,
Present.
Megan Miller, and she will be coming, and Amy Levy.
Here.
So all members are present except Megan Miller.
All right, thank you so much. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Second, is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. Next up are the minutes from our August 9th meeting. Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second, is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. So that brings us to our first policy for the evening, Policy 751, Student Transportation. We will review items A through E before we entertain any motions. So with the first policy up, it's a page and a little bit more, so we'll just look at it in its entirety. Board Member Schneider, any questions or edits for Policy 751?
I have nothing.
Okay. I have a couple things just for clarification. Dr. Garrison, I know you mentioned this, and I absolutely love it, about getting to transportation for all of our students. Do you have any updates, or are there further discussions on transportation for all of our students, including our high schoolers?
So this year was, of course, a thought that we really wanted to venture into at the current time due to budgeting and, of course, the additional buses and bus driver shortages. We weren't able to venture into the K-12 conversation as much as we wanted to. So that is something that we want to look into next year after we kind of transition throughout this year.
Perfect. Thank you for that. I'm sure there will be some interest in hearing that update. Second question, that green information, Mrs. Shope, that means that's an addition if it's in green. Is that accurate? Okay. Since this is in past tense, so effective July 1, 2004, can we change adopts to adopted? Wisconsin Statute 121.54. And then that same section on line 4, I believe it is, could we swap out homeless students for students experiencing homelessness? And then just a quick note on the second page, the last sentence, an annual review of the entire transportation program shall be conducted by members of the board and administrative personnel. What was the thinking behind removing members of the board?
That was my suggestion. That just seems a little bit overly onerous and burdensome, to be honest. I think it's appropriate for the administrative personnel to review the transportation policies annually. And we've got that scheduled with reminders in our calendars to begin that process in May of 2024, so we're ahead of the game. If there's changes to the policies, then those come before the policy committee and the full board, but to somehow involve the members in school board members in an annual review of the entire transportation program, I mean, unless the policy committee is going to take that on every year in May, June, or July, my recommendation is that we remove it.
Well, let me get a little bit more information before I weigh in. What is encompassed in the transportation program outside of the policies that these 751 policies that we're reviewing? Is there like a transportation plan? What's included in the transportation program?
Well, anything that would relate to student transportation or the provision of student transportation from to and from school to extracurricular after-school activities. The business office has a regularly standing monthly meeting with our transportation provider. During the summer, we pick that up, and it's kind of an every other week. And quite honestly, throughout the month of August, we meet with them weekly, to make sure that we're on track. I'm not sure that I can answer it beyond that.
No, that was good information. So what I like to do is what was the spirit of this and make sure that we keep that. But like you're saying, I'm a complete fan of working smarter, not harder.
Right.
I do think that transportation is so critically important. Even if it's information only, I would like some kind of annual thing. I think that would be appropriate, just so the board is abreast on what is included in transportation of our students, especially now during this transition. I think a lot of us are fielding more and more questions related to transportation. So if we have that familiarity, we don't have to get in the weeds with you. It sounds like you guys are meeting sometimes weekly. So I don't think that's necessary, but an overview of what transportation looks like, our goals, how we're accomplishing those, and things that we're keeping on the radar, like we want to extend transportation to our high schoolers. I think that's important for the board to be aware of, and ultimately our community. So Dr. Garrison, keeping that in mind, would you be open to an annual presentation of transportation to the board?
Sure, I think right on I'm not sure if on the next page over, it says the executive director of business service shall be designated as the person responsible for adherence. An annual review of the entire transportation policy program shall be conducted by the administrative personnel, and we can say, and if you want to, we can add the and overview can be provided to the board on the next paragraph. That makes sense?
We'll put it in there.
Let me think about that for just a second.
Or you just want just overview and not add nothing to the policy? We don't have to add it to the policy.
Okay, so what if an annual review of the entire transportation program shall be conducted by the administrative personnel, presenting to the board annually? So
That's
you
it.
all can provide that, and you can decide when it comes to us, when it best fits into your schedule. But I think that's just good information for the board to have.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what do you want?
So an annual review of the entire transportation program shall be conducted by administrative personnel, and presented to the board annually.
And just for clarity, by presentation, are you meaning a physical presentation to the school board or some written recap through the board by weekly updates?
I think it would be most effective to have a presentation at a meeting, and it doesn't have to be some 30, 45-minute exhaustive thing, but just the highlights, because I'm hopeful that people will be in the audience or they'll be watching, or it can be easily shared out, because I think that's important information that our community wants and needs to be aware of.
I certainly agree, and it sounds like perhaps a good August board meeting topic moving forward.
I think that would be great. We're not going to attach a month to it, so you all have that flexibility. But as long as that happens annually, I think that would be great. All right. Now, Megan, last month, we were scheduled to review this, and you did send in a note. I'm not sure what your availability is to documentation that you sent in. Do you want me to read that note that you attached for this policy?
Absolutely. That would be great.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the note says, since we're saying that the bus will not wait for tardy students, can there also be an expectation that the bus will not depart from the stop until after the time given to caregivers. There were instances of the summer school bus arriving much earlier for both pickup and drop-off without Durham notifying parents. While I know we aren't writing policy for Durham, I would hope that this expectation is firmly laid out in our contracts and standard operating procedures with Durham in the interest of the safety of kids and trust building with caregivers. Is that a concern that has been resolved, and are you able to give us any updates on what the protocol is for arrival and departure for buses?
So one of the things that I did was when we had that conversation in general, I did reach out to Durham and ask them kind of what is the protocol when we arrive early and or leave late. Typically, there is I like to call it the Follow the Bus app or
Bus tracker. Yep.
bus tracker app that all parents can have. Now, in a perfect world, people are looking at that while as their babies are getting dropped off. That is one of the options parents do have, is to follow that app. On the other side of that, it's virtually impossible for us to enforce that type of rule. We can ask for it. However, bus drivers do drop babies off, and people are expected to be there when they are being dropped off. In the event that they are early, that's hard to determine as well, based off of how many kids get on the bus on a specific day. That may not be anyone at a specific stop. And so then that bus keeps going to the next stop. And so it's pretty much difficult to monitor that from my office.
Yeah, a couple of comments that I would share real quick as well is the Durham Bus Tracker app was launched here at the beginning of this current school year. So I don't believe that was in place over the summer months, though in retrospect, probably would have made sense for us to launch it over the summer and kind of test it out a little bit. And then the second comment is I believe that it's communicated to parents for the students to be at the bus stop 5 minutes prior to the bus scheduled arrival time and perhaps to wait up to 5 minutes after the scheduled arrival time. The bus route has a number of students on board, and if an earlier student is not going to be riding the bus and a family member waves the bus by, automatically that kind of puts them, running ahead of time. And I understand that if a student is, going to the bus stop at the expected bus pickup time, but if the bus is running a little bit early, so.
I can't change.
So, okay,
Sure.
First, let me turn on my mic. Okay, so here's the thing. We have a lot of moving parts, and with my parent hat on, that would be super frustrating. If my baby is supposed to be picked up at 7 o'clock and the bus came through at 6:50 and we were there at 7 o'clock and I still missed it and now I have to figure it out. Has that been clearly, and there are other things that Ms. Shope, if we could make a list. So is that something that has been clearly communicated to parents, guardians, and caregivers? Ms. Beavers, thank you again for explaining the differences. That, hey, this is your time, but the bus might be here 10 minutes before or 10 minutes. This is your window. So instead of giving parents, be there at 7, this is the window. Has that been specifically communicated? If no, I think that's an easy thing that we can do that might be super helpful to families.
That's something we can communicate. Just
Okay.
let them know to please be there early.
So a bus window.
Sure.
All right, that's number 1 on the list. Okay, I think we're good on that. Board Member Miller, any questions or edits for 751?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
No problem. All right, and again, we'll review A through E before we receive any motions so we can hopefully do everything together. The only thing that I'll say before we move on to 751, Rule 1, is that the first note on the top of my page is that are we okay with entertaining using 751.1, which is different than 751 Rule 1, to start out policy 751 Rule 1. So what I mean by that, 751.1 is student transportation, routing, and scheduling. And then 751 Rule 1 is general transportation guidelines. So it's not clear to me why it was separated out, but I'm going to lean towards whoever did that had a good reason for it. But are we comfortable with, and it's a paragraph and a sentence, with using 751.1 to open up 751 Rule 1? Does anyone object to that?
No objections.
Okay. So what we would do is end up retiring 751.1 because we never delete policies, so we would retire that. Okay. So thank you for indulging me. With that in mind, we'll do this one page at a time. Board Member Schneider or Board Member Miller, do you have any questions or edits with 751.1 becoming the opener for 751 Rule 1 and then anything on that first page?
The only question that I had is on A3, the last sentence. The Executive Director of Business Services for a decision, putting the letter A in there, within 5 working days.
Thank you. Add A after, so the full sentence will read, the principal shall immediately refer such complaint to the Executive Director of Business Services for a decision within 5 working days. Did you get that, Ms. Shope? Yes. Thank you. All right, thank you, Board Member
So we
Schneider.
didn't have any corrections to this one? 751.1, well, 751.1?
Not that have come up so far.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yep.
I just want to make sure we all.
Nope, okay,
all
no
right,
problem.
cool.
Board Member Miller, same question. Anything on the 751.1, which is now becoming the opener to 751 Rule 1, or anything on that first page? Any questions or edits?
No, I think that's a good idea.
Okay. So I just have a couple questions. My first one is, what consideration is given for hazardous conditions? And do we have any protocol around temporary hazardous conditions? How much flexibility do we have? And it's my understanding, correct me if I don't have this correct, is that if you are under the 1 mile or the 2 mile, depending on your grade, but you have to go through what is deemed a hazardous condition, then that may be an exception that would allow you to ride the bus. But for example, if construction is being done, which creates you're shaking your head no, which creates a temporary, it might be 3 months or whatever, hazardous condition, there's no exemption to let the babies ride the bus?
That would be correct. So let me just kind of walk you through the hazardous transportation plan, typically referred to as the hazardous transportation plan. The correct terminology is the unusually hazardous transportation plan.
Oh, can I pause you there? Do we need to make an edit here? If that's not what it's called, we want to be consistent with our language. It's unusually hazardous conditions.
That is correct. Can I inquire as to where that edit would be necessary?
Hold on one second. You keep talking and I'll see
Okay.
if I can find it.
So just to kind of recap the process that the district is currently going through. So the district, Durham School Services, and the city of Beloit sat down to review the unusually hazardous transportation zones that are currently on file and approved by the DPI about 6 weeks or so ago, maybe four to 6 weeks or so ago. In that process, we did a very thorough review because of myself being new and just wanting to have a better understanding of what the unusual hazards were that existed in the current plans. Again, we met with the city engineer who kind of walked through various scenarios. We identified some prospective new unusually hazardous transportation zones. We are currently in the process of drafting those. Once we have that drafted, then it gets sent to the Rock County Sheriff's Department, and the sheriff will assign a deputy, an investigator of sorts, to review our proposed adjustments to the unusually hazardous transportation plan. The sheriff may make recommendations or deem some proposals not appropriate or inappropriate, so that'll kind of shake itself out as we go through the months ahead. Once the sheriff has signed off on our proposal or made recommendations or suggestions for changes, it is then sent to the Wisconsin Department of Public Instruction, and they have an individual there that will review the unusual hazard transportation plan and then approve it either in full or perhaps again with other changes. So it's a rather complex process. It's not as easy as just looking at a map and kind of highlighting certain sections. And quite honestly, we began the process in August. I anticipate that we'll probably hear back from the DPI sometime mid-spring.
Okay. And you are absolutely correct. I have it highlighted on the second page because that struck me as odd. Unusually hazardous transportation plan, to inquire about that. So we don't need to edit, and thank you for being proactive and explaining that. See, that's the type of thing that as a parent, because my thing is, if they're doing construction, this is not safe, but you still want my child to walk. Because I have no idea what the process is that requires this determination of unusually hazardous.
Right. Yep.
That would allow my child to seat on the bus, even if it's temporary.
Right.
So,
And because of that process and the procedural and really the DPI looking at it with a long-term vision of designating areas as unusual hazards, a temporary construction project would not qualify because of the temporary nature of it. The concerns obviously still exist, though. Yeah.
I think sometimes when we think about traffic in general, it's how long is that hazard going to be there? And sometimes we, as parents, including me, think, oh, this is going to be forever, when actually it's like a month or a couple of weeks.
Right.
see, and my thought is, if it's there for an hour, that can negatively impact my child.
Right. The DPI will also look at the appropriateness of the unusual hazard with respect to age levels.
Okay.
So an area may be an unusual hazard for elementary age students, but it may not be deemed an unusual hazard for middle school or high school students. Kind of a weird scenario, but they kind of take into consideration the age of the student and the student's ability then to navigate those situations.
Right.
So it's kind of a balancing test, to be honest with you.
No, that makes sense. Okay.
One may get the ride, one versus the other may not get the ride based off of how long, or if we truly deem it an unusually hazardous area where we want to do something different for transportation.
Yeah.
So I think that's also part of why.
Okay. Is anyone opposed to distilling that down and put that on our, I guess you can't call it a FAQ if people aren't frequently asking, but just things we want you to know about busing? So number one, we have bus windows. Is anyone objecting to also adding kind of an explanation of what is an unusually hazardous situation?
Yeah, I would have no objection to that. In fact, my recommendation would be that if we could wait until the current process runs its course through mid-spring, once the DPI has affirmed our recommendations, perhaps then we can post those maps and, describe the zones and what the hazards are. I mean, we could do that now, but then we're going to have to redo everything in, 6 or 7 months also.
Right, and I'm very cautious about creating extra work, but Dr. Garrison, you don't have to answer right now, but just think about, is this something that Ms. Christopel could potentially take on and do like a sheet on busing and to have that live on our website? So as we get the maps and updated information, it can just be added as a link. But if I wasn't on this committee or on this board, I would have no idea what an unusually hazardous transportation plan even is. So just the definition of that, and then we add more information as it's available, I think could be helpful. All right. On the second page, board members, any questions or corrections for page 2?
I have nothing.
Okay. The only thing that I would ask that we change, just for consistency, in number 3, if we could swap out homeless students with students experiencing homelessness. All right, so 751.1 will be retired. Let me just make myself a little note. And that brings us to 751.2, use of private vehicles to transport students. My first note at the top was, is anyone opposed to combining this with 751.2 Rule 1? And Ms. Shope, refresh my memory. I know that in the past, the nomenclature had been used. If you have a policy, that's the base number or the point, and then if you have specific guidelines, then that becomes a rule. And that makes sense if that base policy is pretty robust, and then you have the specific rules separately. But since the base policy, in this case 751.2, is just 2 paragraphs, is anyone opposed with merging those 2 policies? Or is there a reason they should remain separate that I'm not thinking of? So again, what I'm proposing is merging 751.2, use of private vehicles to transport students, with 751.2 Rule 1, guidelines for transporting students in private vehicles. Is there a reason they should remain separate? Is there something I'm missing?
I mean, in that both of them are talking about transporting students in private vehicles, I don't see an issue. I don't know why they were separated initially, so I always get a little cautious of
Yeah.
putting them all together. I know we have 2 legal guidance that I'm not sure what that is there. I don't remember what that is, I should say. And so that also have to be added to the legal guidance. Is that the same thing? No, 121. Actually, they're both on the same, so yeah, we can add them.
Now,
Well,
let me just say
Legal here is
this.
It's the same thing on both.
Okay, and Mrs. Shope, correct me if you have different information, but it's my understanding that the reason it's broken out in a rule is because this is like the step-by-step how to do the thing. And for me, that makes sense if you have a really robust policy with a lot of information and you want to separate out the step-by-step how to do thing. But in this case, it's 2 paragraphs. So I think that's the reason. Is there another reason that I'm not aware of, Ms. Shope?
I would just say that even though the policy is relatively short, the rule is extremely long with all the different step-by-steps or the different scenarios for transporting students in vehicles and the different things that someone has to do, whether it be a parent, a volunteer, teacher. And so because there's all those steps and things that have to be done, that would be my understanding for why it was separated out. Now, it might be that a couple of the paragraphs in the rule could be added to the policy if they're general enough. Those first couple of paragraphs, I didn't read them all the way through here. I was just kind of skimming them, which would then truly make the rule just steps as opposed to,
Got it.
yeah, more content, I
Yeah.
guess.
Okay.
I
Board
would still
member.
be
Yeah.
fine only because the legal, I was more so concerned, for me personally, it was the legal part. And the legal is also saying the same connection to the rule is in this policy, 751.2, is in the same as in the rule, then I still would be okay, personally.
Okay. And I think we're fine either way. Board Member Schneider, do you have a preference?
No, I don't have a preference.
Okay. Board Member Miller?
Yeah, my only input is, and I don't know if this is still the case, but I remember many years ago, there was some discussion about how, like, for whatever archaic reason, we did like the policy and then the rule. And I thought that there was sort of this mindset of trying to simplify and eliminate rules as much as possible. That's still a thing? Okay, so I would then be in favor of, I really appreciate what you said just a few moments ago about if it's like it's already a 12-page policy separated out.
Yeah.
But since this isn't the case, I think consolidating it is best practice.
Okay, perfect. I just didn't want to impose my preferences on the group if no one else thought that was necessary. Okay, so what we will do is we will combine, let me make sure I have my numbers correct, the information from 751.2 Rule 1 will be retired, and we'll move that to 751.2. So those first two paragraphs will still open the policy, and then we have some additional information, and I have a note here that says repeat for that first paragraph. So I think what we can do is have the first two paragraphs that are in 751.2, and then start with no person shall be approved. And then the remaining information from 751.2 Rule 1. So let me just check in with Ms. Shope. Did you get that?
I think so. So start with the 751.2 information.
Yep.
Then go to no person shall be approved for the transportation, paragraph 2 of the rule.
And everything else in that Rule 1. So 751.2 Rule 1 will be retired.
Yep.
And all of that information will be retained under 751.2 minus that very first paragraph, because that's repeating information. All right, and then Dr. Garrison, just make sure that whatever the legal advice is that we receive for that, that's not lost in the consolidation. All right, everyone on the same page? Let me write myself a note. All right. Okay, so with that being said, let's deal with what was, or the 751.2 before we just made that adjustment. Board Member Schneider, Board Member Miller, any edits or questions?
No, ma'am.
Okay. All right, so Board Member Schneider, anything?
No.
Okay, thank you. That first paragraph, the last sentence, it says, these guidelines do not apply to vehicles. So we technically won't have the guidelines anymore. It'll be just in this policy. So we'll just state that the information in policy 751.2 does not apply if the vehicle is a bus or van chartered from a licensed operator. Does that make sense to everyone?
I need to know where you are again.
Okay. I am on 751.2. That first paragraph, the last sentence, currently starts with, these guidelines do not apply. Since we don't have the guidelines anymore, which are in the Rule 1, we'll just say the information contained in this policy does not apply if the vehicle is a bus or van chartered from a licensed operator. And that makes sense because this policy is use of private vehicles for transportation of students. So I think just that reiteration was the reason that sentence was there.
The information in this policy, can you say it again?
Yep, no problem. Does not apply if the vehicle is a bus or a van chartered from a licensed operator.
Can I make a slight suggestion there?
Absolutely.
Can we begin that sentence with just simply this policy does not apply?
I am perfectly fine with that.
Yeah, thanks.
Yep, Ms. Shope, did you get that? Yes. Okay. All right, so my first question, just on that page, before we move to the rule, which is now going to be added to this policy, is what happens if a student is not picked up after school or an event? So, and we'll get to it later on in the policy, and I'm going to put that on our list that we want to make sure everyone in the district and parents are aware of. I can't pinpoint it. I have it highlighted so when we go, so we won't miss it. But it says that something, and I'm paraphrasing, staff should know that this process could take weeks. So if I'm a coach or an advisor and I have an activity and I have not gone through this process, what happens if a student is not picked up? Like, what happens? Like for the bus, if no one's there to receive this student, they bring them to the school. If they're not at the school, they bring them to Keck. If they're not at Keck, they take them to Durham, which I definitely think we should make sure parents are aware of that. If something happens and you're trying to find your child, like this is the path. But what happens if I haven't gone through this process and I'm not authorized to transport a student in a private vehicle, but a student is left?
Yes.
So I think this probably is most prevalent with away contests. So our athletes or groups traveling to, so, you know, if it was a soccer practice here at home, you know, the district really doesn't have an obligation to provide that transportation after soccer practice back home.
Well, it says later in policy, and it's kind of vague, like we're responsible until the student leaves the premises. Now, it doesn't say like until they leave with a
correct.
parent, guardian, or caregiver, but if the student is still on the premises, and we don't have to resolve this moment, this is just a question that was generated after reviewing the policy, and this might be appropriate for admin regs. Like, yep, here's the policy, here's all the things, but when the rubber meets the road in practice, if you haven't gone through this authorization, but there's a child that is in your care and no one has come to pick them up, like this is what you do.
I think reasonable, most of our coaches, I'll be honest with you, will know this. However, if they don't and haven't went through the process, like you just mentioned, we do everything we can to contact parents, figure out the next step as it pertains to emergency contacts, who can come pick you up, who can come drive you home. Or sometimes, in some scenarios, parents will say, he's allowed to walk to X place. When we get that permission verbally in
Okay.
some of these late situations, especially with athletics.
Are you comfortable, you or your team, however you decide to handle that, with putting something together in admin regs? Like, it doesn't need to be solidified in policy. I think that's too in the weeds. But especially since we have like new coaches and advisors, and if you haven't been put in that situation, and you may not even know, you know, unfortunately, that this is the process you need to go to before you can transport kids, because I would just take the kid home. But that may have negative repercussions, just so we can just make sure that we've done our due diligence to protect everyone in this situation. So if Ms. Shope, if we could put in a note for on our to-do list for 751.2, that Dr. Garrison or the team will pull together admin regs, just to make sure that we're able to support our coaches and our advisors if they find themselves in this situation. All right. So now we are on page 1 of what was 751.2 Rule 1, guidelines for transporting students. We'll take it one page at a time. Board Member Schneider, any questions or edits? And that first
I have
paragraph is omitted.
No questions or comments.
Okay. Board Member Miller, same question.
I'm good.
Okay. So the only thing, and I highlighted it, it's in that last paragraph right above number 1. The process of authorizing an individual to provide student transportation services via a private vehicle may take several weeks. So I think it would be important to make sure that all of our coaches and our, help me, what's the word? Advisors, thank you, team, has this process. I think it would be prudent for them to go through the process and be approved, but we can't, you know, I think it would be prudent, but at least they know what the process is. If that's something they're interested in doing, I think that would be helpful. All right, next page, same question. Board Member Schneider, we'll start with you. So we're on page 2.
I have no comments.
Okay. Board Member Miller?
Looks good to me.
Okay,
We gotta-
yeah.
Just, I'm not sure where I'm on the same space.
We're on page, it starts with number 2, bodily not energy, injury.
Yeah. Okay, that's where we're at. So the first paragraph with the assistant superintendent, which was scratched out because we don't have that.
Yep.
currently. Can we just say the superintendent or his designee, which will be the executive director of business services? And then that'll cover every time. That'll be him. I'm sorry, that'll be Mr. Chady moving forward.
Okay, so Ms. Shope, could you change that to superintendent or designee?
Which is Mr. Chady.
Okay, so there's 2, 3, there's a sentence, and then that's where we're at. So the executive director, instead of having that, we'll say the superintendent or designee. Okay, now my first question is, may withdraw the authorization of any private vehicle operator whose insurance is not adequate and/or driver's license valid. I don't know how sophisticated our tracking system is. Do we enter Amy Levy's insurance expires, like she's approved, but her insurance expires at the end of the calendar year and her driver's license expires on her birthday the following year? Is there an alert? Is it can be withdrawn when something bad happens and we realize that you are out of compliance? Are we proactive or reactive is my question.
Yeah, great
No
question.
judgment.
Yeah, great questions. I'm not sure that I can provide lots of answers with certainty, just given my newness.
Okay.
There is a state system, it's called the PAR system through the Wisconsin Department of Transportation Motor Vehicle Department. So municipalities have the ability to enter in any authorized driver into that system, and you can subscribe to alerts. So if a driver were to incur a speeding ticket or be involved in an accident or some other, an endorsement might expire, we can receive an automatic alert from the Department of Transportation, DMV, with regards to those activities for individuals that are entered in.
Do we have that, or is that aspirational?
I know that we are using the system. I don't know to what fidelity we're using this system. So that's something that I have a note and we'll follow up on.
Yeah.
Yep.
And
Thank
that's
you.
the same thing I don't know how closely we follow that.
Right.
As Mr. Chady is.
Keep in mind that only keeps track of driver's license information. So the other component of your question with regards to insurance information.
Yeah.
That is something in my prior district that we would collect. Typically, insurances renew on a quarter or a semi-annual or annual basis. So we would record the insurance expiration date.
But
and
there's
do-
no alert.
And do our best to try to get that updated from individuals. But you also got to keep in mind, insurance is something that individuals can easily drop or change, and
Yeah.
so a little
Okay.
a little tougher on the insurance end. But so long as you never have an incident, you don't have to worry about the insurance too.
So let me ask you this. Could you repeat the name of that system that we have access to, and you're going to follow up to see to what extent we're utilizing the features?
Yeah, it's called the PAR system, PARS, and my apologies, I can't remember what the acronym stands for.
I can Google it.
Yeah, but it's through the Wisconsin Department of Transportation, Department of Motor Vehicles.
All right, good
And
old
it's a
Scott.
service provided at no charge to municipalities. So, it's just our labor time of inputting the information.
I love it. Okay, so for me, that brings us down to number 5. Not have been convicted within a 2-year period of reckless driving. Call me old-fashioned. I don't want you to ever be convicted of reckless driving if you are authorized to drive my child. Is there some type of okay. So I like for things to make sense. Just to set context, we are still talking about transporting students in private vehicles. So these are district employees, coaches, or advisors.
Not always.
District employees, coaches, or advisors.
Sometimes parents.
Okay. Okay, so let me not put people in that bucket. These are individuals who are transporting students in a private vehicle. So they have to go through this process, and then we know that they are eligible to do that. And then later on, it talks, I'll wait until we get there. Just because I am eligible to drive a student, like the parent, guardian, or caregiver still has to give permission. So in that process of giving permission, am I alerted like Johnny had a reckless driving incident 3 years ago? Like, is that something that I can request as a parent if someone wants the responsibility of driving my child? Like, how does that work?
You can probably make the request. I'm not sure that the district has the ability or the appropriateness to release that information. Keep in mind, parents still have the opportunity to do a CCAP notification on an individual if they have the details, and that would entail also the driving history if there's a conviction.
Okay.
I understand your concerns, and this, throughout my career, I found this to be the challenge point, right? You got to have this balancing test as to when you do receive such notification from the PAR system, as if, for instance, somebody had a speeding ticket, that raises a flag, right? And then administration has to give that some consideration. Is it appropriate for us to continue to permit that individual to transport students or not? And obviously, in my past experience, we would side on the favor of not, simply because of the legalities and the liability issues in those situations. So,
Makes sense.
Yep.
Mike,
Yeah.
it's hard to determine whether or not you're done type of thing. And so most of the time, even in my own experience, I should say, it's been times where a person has had some traffic violation, and we talk about it, they explain it, they got it cleared, they rectified the situation, and we move forward, right? But then there's some other times where, like Mr. Chady has mentioned, where it's like, okay, well, we probably shouldn't have you driving right now. And then it's one of those opportunities as well.
I am certain that the superintendent or designee is going to make wise choices on that. My next question, I know this has come up with the bus. I promise I won't go down the rabbit hole. But number 7, operators are prohibited from using wireless communication devices of any type while driving students. What about GPS? Because it makes me crazy, unless this has changed, which I would be happy to receive that information. But it's my understanding that Durham bus drivers are not allowed to use GPS.
That is correct.
And so the alternative is that they print out driving directions. I feel icky even saying this. For long distance, like if I'm going to the Milwaukee Zoo and I don't know how to get there on my own, I print them out and read them while I'm driving. I do not understand how that makes students more safe.
It's an insurance thing, and I did have a conversation with Durham about that when this was brought up, a couple months ago at this point. And that is their policy, that they cannot use GPS. It was also brought up at their regional conversation in July, based off of our conversation as well. But that is something that they don't allow.
So I think just for clarity, our Durham buses do have GPS capability,
Not
and
all of them.
and it is in use because GPS is the foundation of the bus tracker app that provides that communication signal. So that's there, but I think the differentiation is that there's not a GPS display near the driver's seat to help navigate the bus.
They can't it's my understanding, correct me if I'm wrong. The bus driver is not allowed to interact. And by interact, I mean turn it on, follow it, turn it off when you get to your so yes, there's a tracker because that has to be in place so you can track the bus.
Right.
But they can't interact with GPS. They literally print out directions and read them while they're driving our children.
That's correct.
So I think it would be amazing workaround in admin regs. We meaning you is the way I'm using this we. Implement, it is okay because there's going to be a chaperone. The chaperone can sit next to the driver with GPS and say, turn left up here. I would feel much more comfortable with that than the bus driver literally reading the directions while driving our children to the zoo.
I have our next monthly meeting with Durham on Monday morning, so I've made a note to speak with them about that as well, so.
Please.
Yep.
And if their hands are tied, if we could have a common sense workaround, because there's definitely going to be at least one chaperone. If they can commit to sitting next to the driver to assist with directions, so the driver doesn't have to read MapQuest. Awesome. All right.
I put a note, chaperones could help.
Please.
Yeah, I mean, they could.
Comma,
But,
please.
Yeah.
All right. Okay, so my next thing, this is near and dear to my heart, number 8, and these are the requirements that you have to have. Number 8.1, a properly inflated spare tire and functional jack are present. Most hybrid and electric vehicles don't have spares. Does that preclude them from participating in transporting students, even if they've gone through this process?
I wouldn't take them off the conversation because, they probably have AAA, they probably have other.
Well, the way the policy is written, like even if I did the program, I don't have a spare tire. So I couldn't because that's a requirement. Do we want to entertain omitting number 1 or putting it in as recommended? Because right now it's a minimum safety requirement. Yep.
I like your language of recommended. It gives wiggle room, and I mean, I almost think like, I mean, I understand what you're saying, and I know Milwaukee's piloting like the hybrid electric bus thing, which I think is cool, and hopefully we can get something like that here at some point, but I think just saying like, it's recommended that you have this, or like have an alternative way of, correcting the situation or something like that,
So is everyone
like within
comfortable?
reason.
Sorry,
Yeah,
I didn't
no,
mean to
like
do-
within reason, yeah.
Yep. If number 8 read, operators must inspect their vehicles prior to each trip to verify the minimum safety hold on. Okay, if we start with a properly inflated spare tire and functional jack is recommended, period. Operators must inspect their vehicles prior to each trip to verify that minimum safety requirements are met, including, and then 2, 3, 4 would become 1, 2, 3. Does anyone object to that? All right. Mr. Schneider is shaking his head no, not hearing anything. Ms. Shope, do you need me to repeat anything? Okay. All right, that brings us to the next page, which starts with the end of number 12. Board Member Board Member Schneider, Board Member Miller, any questions or edits on that next page? And actually, we'll just take to the end of the policy because we have the next page and a sentence.
I feel great.
Under number 22, there are several spots where it says his, her. We should change those to his, her, / they. Or
Perfect.
he, she, / them. There's 1, 2, 3, 4 incidents in that under number 22.
All right. Okay, Ms. Shope is saying there are others too, and her identifying that leads me to believe that she is on top of it. Yep. All right. Thank you, Board Member Schneider. Okay.
Just for consistency's sake.
Please.
We may want to, instead of identifying the executive director of business services, go back to the superintendent and designee in all of the language.
Absolutely. We want to be consistent.
And I believe that may apply to some of the policies we reviewed earlier here during the meeting as well. We'd have to look back.
The other ones already, we can make that correction.
Okay.
Yeah.
And Ms. Shope, are you able to do a search so it's perfect? All right.
The other ones I didn't catch that, Mr. Chady. However, we can go back and look. I didn't see.
Right.
Outside of this one, where that was a distinction with assistant superintendent there.
Okay. So Ms. Shope, if you just run those through the search and she will make those, just thank you. Okay, number 14, just want to do a check-in to see, and the reason I do this is not to kind of point the finger or a gotcha, but I just feel like it's our responsibility to make sure that our policies are relevant. And if there's something in policy, we should be doing it. And if we're not doing it, then we need to have a conversation. Should we either start doing that, or does the policy need to be adjusted? So that's kind of the context. With that in mind, number 14, the final sentence, the district business services department shall maintain a list of employees authorized to transport students and distribute the approved list upon request, but at least quarterly to all principals. Is that currently happening?
I believe that to be the case. We did review these policies with the individual that helps oversee transportation in our department, but I can confirm that again tomorrow.
Thank you so much. And then the program through Department of Transportation, is that the Wisconsin Department of Motor Vehicles Employer Notification Program, or is that something different?
No, I believe that refers to the same PAR system.
Okay, and then if we could just omit that dash that's after the apostrophe in Vehicles Employee Notification Program, please. Yeah, because there's an apostrophe and then a dash before the S. Oh, say again? Oh, I already,
It's hard to see because they're little.
It's like,
no, now that you've noticed it, I can see it, but I highlighted it, so I couldn't immediately see it under my height. Thank you. All right, teamwork. Okay, number 18. I think we should put this on the list of things to make people aware of. For those following at home, which I hope there are many, 18 says no weapons. Any person otherwise qualified to transport students shall agree not to carry a concealed weapon while transporting students other than the person's own children, even if they are a holder of a concealed carry permit. I think this is something that we should make sure, be proactive about making people aware of. Does anyone object of just making sure that that is on the kind of highlighted list so people are aware of that? And then my question, forgive my ignorance, what is the status, if anyone knows? Does Wisconsin have any open carry laws? Because this is just concealed carry.
Wisconsin has a concealed carry law. We don't
Okay.
have open carry, as I understand it. Unless we live in Florida, they can open carry there, but.
All right, perfect. Just wanted to check in. Number 20, upon return of the vehicle to the school, the operator must make sure each student has proper transportation home and remain at school until all students have left the school property. So that was the thing that I was talking about. So does this mean that if I am authorized to transport a student in my private vehicle, can I just take them home? Because this says that I have to return them to the school, even though I'm authorized to transport them in my private vehicle, and then I have to wait for someone to come get them or wait until they leave the premises. And it doesn't necessarily have to be with a parent, guardian, or caregiver. It seems to me it would be more safe if we had the flexibility to just take the student home.
Correct. I mean, I think we have to act within reason, more, again, objective versus subjective, I think.
I would absolutely agree with you if number 20 did not exist in policy. So is there a reason to keep that there? Or if I already have a child in my private vehicle, is there a reason for bringing them to the school instead of taking them to whatever whatever their destination is?
Correct. Can we just say home and or school? The proper transportation home and remain at home and just remain at school away?
Well, here's the thing. I would be for, okay. Unless I am convinced otherwise, it doesn't make sense for me to bring them back to the school and wait for somebody to come pick them up to take them wherever they need to be. Correct. Unless there's something I'm missing. So if we could either omit this, I would say omit it, because I don't know how to make that make sense.
On return of the vehicle, the operator must make sure each student has proper transportation home. And, well, we can omit it, but I still think we're gonna act within reason, so, I mean, we can admit it, I'm fine with that.
Okay, does anyone object to omitting number 20?
I just wanna make sure we're okay with taking people home if we need to.
Well, I already have you in my custody. So and I could be missing something, it happens. I would rather just take you home than to bring you to the school and then wait for someone to come get you to take you home.
Yeah, no, and that admin regs, we can just make sure that's clear too. We can just say, you know, contact the parents, you're taking them home, and, because I think that's still a part of this conversation.
It's not a part of number 20 in this policy.
It's not.
I support whatever you put in admin regs to support this policy, but are we okay with omitting number 20? All right, I'm gonna take the silence as a yes.
Well, let me ask my team real quick.
Please.
I think the way I'm reading it is you're driving for an activity related to school, I'm assuming. So everybody's being returned to school.
See, it doesn't say that. And I only say that in the spirit of, I was like, it's a parent, it's a guardian, and you guys were like, no, which you should have done. We're like, no. It could be anybody who's authorized. So I don't think we can make that assumption. However, comma, please continue.
That's just how I was reading it. So then you would return them to the school. Then if nobody comes to get,
Take them home.
yes, then you are obviously already cleared to take home. But like if I'm a parent and you're transporting my kid, I'm gonna expect to pick them up at the school. But if I don't come, I want you to take them home.
Correct.
No, and I think that's good because if I ride the bus, I don't expect the bus to bring my baby home. The bus is going to take my child to school. But the only way my child, and this is stated earlier in policy, would be in a private vehicle if there is no bus. There is, you know what I mean? There isn't that centralized meeting because then they would be on the bus.
Yep. Nope,
All right.
I totally understand.
So everyone's good with removing 20?
Yeah.
All right. And just for clarification, and I could be overthinking this, Dr. Garrison, you decide if you want this in admin regs. Number 23, employees transporting students must stay within the scope of the employee's employment. Now, what I take that to mean is just because I'm authorized to transport students in my private vehicle, I only do that for a school-related reason. Everybody on the same page?
Agreed.
Agreed. But,
Yes.
you know, sometimes you on a school-related reason, and let's say the kids didn't get to eat, now I gotta make an extra stop to get something to eat, because the kids didn't, I'm thinking outside the box a little bit on that too. That's just me. 'Cause you
I say we let that lie.
Question, so my mind goes.
No. And I think I was thinking of something slightly different. If I'm authorized to transport the soccer team, I'm only going to transport them for a school-related purpose. And I think that would happen in the scope of traveling for a school-related purpose. Like, I'm not going to call you on a Wednesday and say, hey, are you hungry? You want to go get something to eat?
Oh, no.
Right. So I just... No, ma'am. So, all right, everyone, same page. That last sentence, minor offenses shall result in written warning and counseling. I recommend we put up to suspension from work without paying instead of counseling to suspension.
Minor offenses shall result in written warning up to.
Yeah, kind of the escalation. Up to suspension from work without pay and repeat minor offenses. That should be repeated. So repeated minor offenses and or major offenses can result in suspension without pay and or termination and or removal from position. So here's my question. Is removal from position, which I think it is, but I want to check, different from termination, i.e., you can't be the advisor of this anymore, but that doesn't mean you're fired.
Correct.
Am I understanding that correctly? So if we're doing this in levels of escalation, it would just make sense to me, since we started with suspension, the next thing would be removal. Okay, So without pay and/or removal from position and/or termination. Okay. All right, look at us. We have reviewed policies A through E on our agenda. So just to recap, is there a motion to approve the following policies for a first reading of the full board? And that would include policy 751, policy 751, Rule 1, policy 751.2, and retire policies 751.1 and 751.2. Ms. Shope, did I get that right?
I got 750.
Well, 751, Rule 1, I don't think, let me double check.
751 Rule 1 is retired.
751.1, you're correct, for retiring.
Correct.
And also 751.2. No, point 2, Rule 1. All right,
But we're moving 751.2 Rule 1 to 751.2. That's what I got. But then I could be wrong somewhere. I don't know.
okay, let me just double check on 751, Rule 1. Right, so that's the one rule that we kept. Okay, so just to recap, and then I'll attempt that policy again. Thank goodness we didn't have a second. We are moving forward with policy 751 and 751 Rule 1. We are retiring 751.1, and we are moving forward with 751.2 and retiring policy 751.2 Rule 1. Yes. All right. Is there a motion to approve that?
So moved.
No. A second.
All right, there is a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion on that policy set? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Greg, did we get you?
Yep, aye.
Perfect. All right, that motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone. That brings us to policy 752, transportation to extracurricular activities. Okay, this is a short one. Board Member Schneider, any questions or edits?
I know this policy is looking at providing transportation for people other than students to away games. But in the green section, it goes, is an extension to providing support to our teams, and it also provides additional adult monitoring while on out-of-town trips, etc. It goes on, therefore, the board may provide such transportation to students in accordance with state law. But the first sentence is talking about providing transportation to residents, staff, parents, or guardians.
Yeah, I have the same type of edit. So we will address that before we leave it. Thank you for highlighting that. Board Member Miller, any questions or edits?
No, I have a dumb question. I mean, I thought it was, I was just curious why we took out energy saving gesture, because it still is an energy saving gesture. I think that's actually kind of a cool thing to promote, but I don't feel strongly about it at all. So, but, since we're talking about it, I just thought I'd mention it. But yeah, I agree with what you both said.
You don't want to fight for it?
I mean, I'll fight a little for it. I mean, I think it's good for us to be aspirationally, environmentally conscientious. So I think putting those words in the policy are great to do. But if it's like tedious and we don't care, that's where my fight stops.
Not enough of a fight. We're going to let it lie. Okay, so I have a couple questions. Okay, so we just finished a whole policy set that was focused on private vehicles. This is not that. So what I am recommending is the Board of Education recognizes that provision of transportation for residents, staff, students, or guardians to extracurricular activities by contracted transportation services. I want to be clear. The district is not organizing the carpool caravan to get everyone to the game. Does anyone object to that clarification? So extracurricular by contracted transportation services. All right, so this is not going to be confused with the policy set we just finished.
Who's paying? We're still paying for this? I'm just asking. Is this? Because that's what,
So payment is not explicit. I have seen it over my years, and the district provides like the team's going to state, and the district provides a bus. Now, you could charge to have people ride on that bus. So the district holds the contract, but we kind of get reimbursed by the people. That I wouldn't want to solidify in policy. I would like to give the administration the flexibility to work out those details. But I do think it's important for us. We're not organizing the caravan. So by contracted transportation services, I'm fine with what is recommended for omission, the green, everything. So I would have that say by contracted transportation services is an extension to providing support to our teams and also provides additional adult monitoring. So this is my question. If I need a ride to the game and I want to support students, does that require me to be a chaperone of students? Because I think that's another set of responsibilities that if that's what we're requiring to get a ride, it makes me uncomfortable because one, does the person want to do that? Does the person have the capacity to do that appropriately? Is that what we want? Because a chaperone, I would say, be akin to a volunteer in our district. We vetted the volunteer. We've had some interaction with them. I just don't want to put anyone who's interested in a ride and making them a chaperone responsible for supervising our students.
I'm not sure that the expectation is there.
Well, it is because it says it in the policy. It says it also provides additional adult monitoring while on the out-of-town trip.
I think
So
that's,
for me, that's a chaperone.
I think that's intended as like an incidental benefit. Like incidentally, there's adults there, so like de facto, there's other adults there. It doesn't say, for me, I'm gonna push back a little bit because it doesn't say like, we're not specifically ascribing chaperone responsibility in the policy. There's like adults around, so we're stating a fact. Like there are adults around supervising. It's not like providing additional adult supervision with people required to be chaperones.
that
know what
you
I'm saying?
brought to the game.
Yeah, you're bringing people to the game, and so because there's grown-ups there, it's just basically just stating that there's grown-ups there. I mean, we could just eliminate it and it wouldn't matter, but I think it's just sort of stating the fact that like other adults are there, so it's a benefit incidentally, but not like intentionally, like you are now chaperoning because you're on the bus.
I think if it's written in policy, it better be intentional. And with as little judgment as possible. I have been in games and saw adults cuss out refs, whoever. So if that lovely individual happens to be getting a ride, that's the person who's monitoring and supervising our children. I think that's a bit of a reach, and I don't think that should be included just because you want a ride to the game. That's my concern.
But when I read this, I read monitoring as just monitoring. I didn't add just chaperone to it because it was said chaperone. But we also, I don't want us to think that we may have that parent all the time too. I mean, there's some parents that just need a ride and to get on a game and they're monitoring. They're monitoring. They may not be that irate parent per se who's cussing out the refs.
Okay, let me ask you this. What is the value of monitor? And hopefully you are monitoring and you never need to intervene, right? But I wouldn't ask someone to monitor if something popped off if I didn't want them to intervene. And I I would say 99% are lovely, capable, responsible. We're so happy you were here. I just think it's a stretch that doesn't really benefit us to have someone as a de facto chaperone just because they needed a ride.
We also may cut people out from being a chaperone if.
But see, that's the point. They're not chaperone, they're a passenger. I think the way this policy is written, it makes them a chaperone. And I'm saying I don't think we should do that. Like, you can have a ride, but that doesn't mean you're responsible for other people's children.
It says in the bottom, though, it says that like any resident, staff, et cetera, who receives transportation shall comply with the rules. And in the previous set of rules, it was like if you're not going to act right, like you don't get to ride the bus kind of thing, right? So, I mean, could we just eliminate where it says, and it also provides additional adult monitoring, and then it eliminates the whole issue, and then people's behaviors, if they're not amazing, are kind of covered in that second part there.
I absolutely agree in omitting that. So that first sentence would end with by contracted transportation services. And then we would start back up with therefore. Is it the board that's providing this? That was my question for clarification, or is this the administration?
The administration.
Okay. Therefore, the administration provide, and that seems awkward.
The district.
Okay, therefore, the district may provide such transportation in accordance with state law, provided that space is available. We should take out the students for the reason that Greg said, because we address the students at the end. But this is for adults, residents, everyone, parents that's listed. However, priority will be to give our students a ride first, and if we have additional space, this is where you fall in. All right, Ms. Shope, that was a lot of change. Do you need me to repeat anything? Yeah. Okay, so let's start from the beginning. The board, hey, team effort. The Board of Education recognizes that provision of transportation for residents, staff, parents, or guardians to extracurricular activities by contracted transportation, well, now we got to finish the sentence. Okay, is an extension of providing support for our teams, period. We good so far? Yes. Therefore, the administration may provide transportation in accordance with state law, provided that space is available. What can we just say? If space is available. Transportation of students will receive priority. Anything repeated? And then we'll keep that last sentence. Okay. Thank you. All right. All minds clear. Is there a motion to move policy 752 onto the full board for a first reading
So moved.
as amended?
So moved.
Second?
All right, there's a motion and a second. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
All right, that motion passes unanimously. That brings us to our last partial policy set. So we're going to shift gears to 443, starting with 443.2, student conduct on school buses. It's a one-pager. Board Member Schneider, any questions or edits?
Just let's see, the third paragraph, the last sentence says decisions regarding special education students should be students with special needs or students receiving specialized education. So do it person first.
Perfect, thank you. Ms. Shope, did you get that?
Which way do we want it, specialized needs or receiving special education?
Maybe receiving.
No, Miss, go ahead.
Students with disabilities.
Okay, everyone good with that edit? All right. Board Member Miller, same question. Any questions or edits for this policy?
Looks good.
All right. My only thing, that second paragraph, which will now be the first paragraph because the first one is omitted, the second to the last line, it might be the third to the last line, just in front of coaches, there's just an extra space there if we could omit that. And then I have a question. So the last paragraph in green says, serious and or repeated disciplinary problems on the bus may result in a student having their riding privileges suspended. And then the next paragraph, part of what is omitted talks about expulsion. So I guess my question is expulsion of transportation privileges no longer an option?
I've never experienced an expulsion from the bus. If a student has a disciplinary infraction on the bus, it is referred to the school administration, and usually it's a violation of the code of conduct, and then we follow that process. I interpreted this as suspension from the bus. I've never experienced an expulsion from the bus.
If the infraction is big enough, it's going to come back to the school level.
So this is the reason I bring it up, because the sentence that the administration is proposing that we omit says violations of rules established for bus riders may result in the suspension or expulsion of transportation privileges. So if you're removing that line and the line that you're adding only speaks to suspension, then you're removing the ability to expel transportation privileges. Now, I guess you could suspend indefinitely, and that was your workaround, but I'm just wondering, is the intention to take expulsion off the table?
Yes.
That's the intention?
Never
Okay, so nobody gets expelled from the bus.
They may be suspended for a significantly
time.
long period of time.
All right, but no one gets expelled from the bus.
never experienced that.
Right.
Yeah, I've never.
Not in my-
Not that we've ever experienced it. That's something that we will not experience because it's going to be removed as an option.
Right.
All right, I have no problems with it. I just wanted to make sure we were being intentional. All right, and again, we're going to review policies G through J before we entertain any motion language, but that brings us to policy 443.2, Rule 1. If we are following our same practice, is there a desire to merge those? The first one is a page, and then we have the rules. Board members, what's your preference?
I would be in favor of merging and eliminating the rule.
Okay, retiring. Board Member Schneider, do you have a preference?
I'm okay with merging them.
Okay, so let me just write myself a note. So we are proposing retiring Rule 443.2, Rule 1, bus rider rules, and retaining that information in Policy 443.2, student conduct on school buses. Ms. Shope, you good? All right, so now we're looking at what will be retired, but we still need to address the content. So we're on 443.2, Rule 1. Board Member Miller, I have your note available. Do you want me to read it? Nope, you know what, I take that back, because it's the same note, but it applied in two different rules. All right, so keeping those previous comments from Board Member Miller in mind, Board Member Schneider, this one's kind of lengthy, so we'll do page by page. That first page, any questions or edits?
I have no edits for page 1.
All right, Board Member Miller, same question.
I'm good on all the pages.
Oh, well, good to know. All right, I just have two things. The first one, that very first sentence that's newly added, in addition to school board policies and school rules, instead of which remain in force, can we put which are enforced on school buses? Thank you. And then my only question, like, there's a lot of rules on here. Who teaches students how to ride on buses? Is that
Staff.
on the parent to teach them how to ride the bus? is that something that we review in our classroom for our bus riders and maybe all of our kiddos? Because at some point you're going to ride a bus on a field trip. I think all of these rules are great. My concern is, as much as it hurts my heart, not everyone reads policy. And if we have an expectation that our kids should be doing all of these things, who teaches our kids to do those things?
So our staff typically teaches our kids when they're on our property or definitely at school what to do, how to load the bus, how to get off. I mean, they teach we go over that information with our students.
Okay.
Now, it is still, I always say, the parents can also enforce our suggestions, and it'll be a great help.
So I think the next thing we should put on our to-do list, if we can get these bus riding rule, and if this is already happening, please let me know. That will make my heart happy. If we have an expectation of our families, have we given them, if I wasn't on policy and if my kid rode a bus, I wouldn't, I mean, it's general, like act like you got good sense, but I wouldn't know the specifics of all of these rules to reinforce with my student. Are we giving these rules to parents?
I don't think we're giving these rules to parents. That is something that we can definitely consider.
Okay, and it can definitely be digital.
Right.
And if someone wants a paper copy, you go right ahead.
So in the family handbook, there is a link to the policies, and the family handbook is on our website. And there is reference to transportation policies in that. I'm not going to say 100% there's this one, but I'm going to make the assumption there is. But don't take my word for it. I can look right now and get back to you.
My only concern is if we're counting on a busy parent that has 17 things going on to click on that link and then read the rules and then reinforce them to Johnny, I would hope that that is happening. I would feel more comfortable because these are things that we want to make sure happen. It's not like, it would be nice. I think it would be prudent and useful if we say, hey, these are the 7 rules. And even if we definitely have the link to policy, but consolidate and make it user-friendly, do bullet points and say, hey, we just want to make sure we're all on the same page because the goal of the rule is to keep people safe on the bus. All right, it's my 3 cents.
May I ask a
Yes,
question? Is this
please.
on the PBIS matrix? Isn't there like a column or a row or something for like bus expectations? No?
I believe there was at one point in time.
Got it. All right. Thanks for clarifying.
Okay. Thank you for indulging me. All right, page 2, same question. Any questions or edits? Board Member Schneider, you're up first.
Number 18,
Yep.
students are expected to keep aisles clear. It says Claire, so we have a misspelling.
Thank you. Anything else on that second page?
That is it.
All right. My only note, number 16. If a school bus is prevented from discharging a student at the student's regular departure, this is what I was referencing early. At a student's regular departure point during an emergency, the bus driver shall return the student to his or their respective school, where the principal shall be responsible for contacting the parent/guardian. If the principal is not available, the bus driver shall deliver the student to his or their supervisor, and that would be at the bus company. I don't know if parents are aware of the kind of if-then nature of that protocol. So if there's an emergency, they're going to take your baby to the school. And if no one is at the school to receive the baby, your baby's going to be at Durham. I wouldn't automatically assume my child would be at Durham. So if we could be intentional about just making parents aware of that, we might prevent some panic. All right. So Ms. Shope, if we could add that on the follow-up item. All right, that brings us to the last page of this policy. Board Member Schneider, any questions or edits on the page that starts with 21?
I have no questions or edits.
Okay. Ms. Miller has declared that she is good. My only question on, well, let me go back. Ms. Shope, is this an error in kind of the formatting? And I apologize, I meant to bring this up before, but to go from 3 to 1, isn't our standard like 3A or is it 3? What's the standard?
So, board docs just automatically goes 1, 1, 1, 1, 1.
Okay.
Automatically go 1A Roman numeral. So yes,
Will you, and I apologize, I saw it earlier, I did not bring attention to it. For the policies that we reviewed this evening, can you just make sure that they're in our, thank you. Appreciate that. Just a quick note, and it's preference, completely up to the administration. Under what is currently labeled 4.3, halfway through it says, if unsuccessful, the transportation provider will transport the child to the school or the district administration center. So 2 issues, and this is for kindergarten or younger. So that thing that we're gonna make sure parents know, I'm assuming that's for 1st grade and above. That's the protocol. And I'm only making that assumption because this specifically says kindergarten and younger age students. So, yes.
that has changed between, like, the first time we had it on the agenda to this time.
Okay.
Say 1st grade and younger. I apologize if that
No, you,
changed on the uploaded version, it should have.
okay, and this is 4.3. Yep, thank you. 3.4. Okay, so my version says kindergarten and younger age students. That should be 1st grade and younger? Okay, now, 1st grade and younger age students must be received by a responsible person. So let's back up. Because when we were gonna highlight telling people where they can find their child, that's in an emergency, okay? So let's just make sure we're clear, so people don't get confused. That's if an emergency happens, your baby is either gonna be at the school or at Durham, okay? Now this is just regular, it's a Wednesday. If you are 1st grade or younger, someone needs to be at the residence to receive the child. Do I have it straight so far? If that doesn't happen, if unsuccessful, the transportation provider, so that's going to be Durham, will transport the child to the school or the district administration center. Do we just want to put KEC because people know what KEC is if they're reading this and looking for their baby? So if I'm in kindergarten and no one's at my house to receive me, and no one's at my home school to receive me, there is someone at CAC to receive the baby.
Curveball. Just depending on, I mean, naturally, most kids are home by 5.
Yes.
So that's definitely here around that time. And now if it's something way crazier than that, then they can't leave the baby here with nobody here, so they have to put it to the bus station. That makes sense. I don't want, I say to Durham's bus depot.
Okay, so here's the thing. If I'm using this policy as a guide to where to find my child, I think we should be explicit. So is everyone okay with changing the district administration center? I think people are more familiar with KEC or COLAC Education Center, so we're gonna make that change. In the event that no one is available at KEC to receive the child will be taken to Durham. Well, one, we gotta make sure Durham, you're shaking your head no.
They typically take them to the police department then.
Okay, then I think that's what we need to put here. And then just make sure that Durham's on the same page, and then we're communicating that to parents. So the wrap up on that is we're gonna change it to COLAC Education Center. In the event that no one is available to receive the child at COLAC Education Center, the child will be taken to the police station. Everyone fine with that clarification? All right, so that takes care of 443.2, which now includes the content from 443.2 Rule 1, which is being retired. We're almost there, we have 2 more. Here we go. Policy 443.2. Okay, so to look ahead, Rule 2 and Rule 3. They're not that long. Combined, they're a page. Is the will of the board to absorb Rules 2 and 3 of 443.2 in 443.2,
I
like
would
we did with
love
Rule 1?
To absorb and retire.
Board Member Schneider, do you object to that?
No.
All right. Ms. Shope, you good? Yep, it is going to be 443.2.
Big policy.
I just want to say that I appreciate you making that face. Everyone's going to be okay. All right. So now we are on 443.2, Rule 2. We're reviewing the content, but that's going to be retired and absorbed into 443.2. All right, here we go. That policy, Board Member Schneider, any questions or edits?
No, I have nothing.
Board Member Miller, same question.
I have nothing.
Okay, I have two things. One is really small and one is huge. All right. I love policy. Okay, deep breath. I think we have actually three things. The first are really minor. Okay, in line 3, I think we have an extra space in front of procedures. So if we could delete that. And no, that's the first little thing. The second little thing is that next sentence says they are designed to provide fair and responsible. Can we put let me make sure I have the name correct now that we're merging. This policy is designed, wait, hold on. This policy is designed to provide a fair and responsible system in dealing effectively with unacceptable bus rider behavior. Instead of saying they are designed, if we could just be specific as to what we're talking about. So this policy is designed. Okay, now here's the big thing. In the section that starts with bus drivers, so under the proposed omissions that are in pink and have the line through them, everyone with me? All right, bus drivers are responsible for disciplinary action on the bus. The initial phase of discipline for non-critical situations shall be between the bus driver and the rider. Okay, that is vague and as a parent makes me very uncomfortable. So whatever the bus driver deems fit for your punishment, that's between the kid and the bus driver. Is that what we want to intend? Is that what we intend to communicate?
No.
Okay, we need new language because my head almost shot off when I read that. Okay, so again, yes.
You need to say sit down.
Yes.
Like that's the way I was thinking about it. Or let's say a kid was, jumping from seat to seat. Hey, you can't jump from seat to seat. That's.
But we got to think of the language.
It's still disciplinary action because someone has to tell the kid not to do X. So that's the way I was looking at it.
It's like classroom managed behavior.
I think that is a very rational way to look at that. And I am thrilled that that's the way you saw it. Now, however, the initial phase of discipline for non-critical situations, like the things you just outlined, shall be between the bus driver and the student. I think for a reasonable bus driver, that makes complete sense. But I like to think of, and we can't do every scenario, but that's too vague for my comfort.
So we can say between the bus driver and report it to
Okay, so here's my concern, and then we can back into the language. I'm not giving carte blanche to discipline a student to the bus driver because I don't know what the bus driver's thought process is or capacity to act. Now, in a reasonable situation, what you just described makes complete sense to me. But and this may already be established, and we're just not communicating in this policy. So, Mr. Shady, I'll turn to you. In your frequent communication with Durham about processes and procedures, is there kind of a matrix of what discipline looks like between a bus driver and a student?
In my time in the district, discipline has not been an issue that's been addressed, and not quite sure that that falls under the business services umbrella either.
I think it does, but let me give more information. So it may be if I'm the bus driver and I need to address a student, first it's a verbal warning, like, hey, you got to stop doing that. Okay, you need to stop. The second thing, it may be, we got to pull the bus over. I need to have a conversation with you, like something along those lines. So it's not just whatever you think is best. Like there's some kind of guidelines for what happens if there's a situation on a bus. Ms. Beavers, it looks like you are looking for something.
I was just looking at the language in the code of conduct for like class, just trying to gather some language.
And here's my point. I want to trust that everyone's going to act within reason, but these are not our direct employees.
Right.
So they may not have access or exposure to kind of what our tiers are, or these are the things you do. And it might be, this might be something that's really helpful to students. And if we can reiterate and reinforce what happens in the classroom on the bus, I think that would be optimum.
But on the previous policy,
Yes.
it kind of lays out, well, again, I'm just going back and forth.
No, I appreciate that. Where are you?
On policy, the one that we ended up retiring and adding, 443.2 Rule 1.
Yep.
The one that we retired. It says, while on the bus drivers will be full in charge of the bus and shall promptly be obeyed. Students shall ride the bus at assigned seats and routes. And it kind of goes through what they can and can't do. And so if they're breaking these rules, a bus driver can say, hey, you can't.
But that's a verbal warning. And for me, it's very different to say the discipline is between the kid and the bus driver, then the bus driver has the authority to issue a verbal warning. To me, those are two very different things. And if we can give guidance for what our expectation is, I think that lessens the probability that we'll have unmet expectations.
I think we also probably need to contact Durham and see what rules or what they already have in place as well. Like,
That would make sense.
yeah, if we're gonna look at it like this. Because they may have some things already in place that we could add to this conversation, per se, to change how this is reading.
Okay, should we stick a pin in Rule 2? And yes, Ms. Shope?
Sorry, I was just going to make the suggestion, just because as Dr. Garrison was talking about looking back at the previous policy, I noticed there's, like number 2 is while on the bus, and it starts saying all these things that students have to do.
Can you tell us where you are?
In the previous policy, 443.2, Rule 1, that's going to be merged into the policy.
Yep.
So under rules of conduct, where the first number 1, prior to loading, all that's crossed off. And then
Yep.
number 2 says, while on the bus, the driver's in full charge should be promptly obeyed. Students shall ride on assigned bus routes, be given assigned seats as necessary. And then if you turn that page over or scroll to the next page, it says students have to sit
Can you give me the number?
properly. Number 3.
Okay.
Sit properly in their seats, and so on and so forth. And so I'm wondering if we need to reformat, and maybe after some of these, like, quote unquote, more minor infractions that a student would do, that the bus driver would have that initial ability to say, sit down, don't wave your arms out the bus, don't, do this or that. We then would be able to have this information that you're looking at in 443.2 Rule 2 as like a paragraph underneath that saying that bus drivers are responsible for disciplinary action for the above infractions, or, for students who don't follow the above procedures.
How about
Or
this?
something along that line. That was gonna be my suggestion.
Thank you so much. If we say, bus drivers are responsible for providing verbal warnings for disciplinary action or verbal warnings to address disciplinary actions on the bus. That makes it clear, like, we're on the same page, and this does say minor infractions. That's a verbal redirect. That's not anything else that you may have in your toolkit.
I like that, and it aligns with the, like, level 1 infractions of the code of conduct are minor acts of misconduct that interfere with the orderly operation. So I feel like that aligns with that.
Okay, is anyone opposed to that clarification?
We still should go ask Durham what they're currently doing.
Absolutely agree.
I'm fine with that then.
Okay, so bus drivers are responsible for providing verbal warnings for disciplinary, or verbal warnings to address disciplinary actions on the bus. And we would omit the initial phase of discipline for non-critical situations shall be between the bus driver and the rider. And even add that, okay, so forgive me, Mrs. Shope. Bus drivers are responsible for providing verbal warnings to address non-critical disciplinary actions on the bus. And that way we retain that, but we can get rid of the vague language. Is anyone opposed to that edit?
No.
Okay, and then last two things are just for clarification. When we get down to the part that begins with following the issuance of a misconduct report, bus ridership disciplinary action shall be in accordance with the student code of conduct. And does Durham have a copy of our student code of conduct since they're writing these so they can make sure it's in line, or is that?
I have an email that I sent to them on March 14th of 2023 that includes the code of
Look
conduct.
at you being specific. I love it. All right. That shall be in accordance with the student code of conduct and will be dealt with accordingly by the building administrator. So I subscribe to, if more than one person is responsible, nobody's responsible. But it's up to the administration how you want to make it work. I just want to check in to make sure this is what we want it to say. Is there a reason it doesn't identify the building administrator or the building principal?
I mean, we say building administration because assistant principals could take care of it, principals could take care of it. It could be reported to a teacher, and then the principal has still had to get taken care of. And so I like the way it's reading right now.
And I'm perfectly fine with that, but let me ask you this. If it doesn't happen, who's responsible?
Well, then it'll fall back on in this case, the driver.
No. The driver does their part, and they give it to somebody that looks like they're in charge in the building. If there's no follow-up by the building administration, who's responsible?
There should always be follow-up. I'm not sure that's not we should always follow up.
Well, absolutely, but on Earth One, that doesn't always happen. So my question is, if there is not follow-up, which will never happen, but just humor me, who's responsible? The bus driver issues the report to the administration, and there's no follow-up because sometimes lifes.
Sure. So I think in that case, the driver can ask for a follow-up if it hadn't been any follow-up.
No. My question is, follow-up didn't happen. Who's responsible? Who in the building is responsible?
Yeah, the administrator, the principal of the building.
So that's where I'm going. For me, if I was the principal and I'm responsible, I would want to make sure the report comes to me. Now, if I delegate it to someone else, but if the report goes to Susie, but I'm responsible for it, I don't think that's fair to the building principal. Now, this is just my 2 cents. I trust the administration to make the final call on this, but I just wanted to make sure you were intentional about, yep, I'm fine with the way it's currently written in policy. Because this says the bus driver can give the report to anybody who looks like they're in charge and administration.
The reality is the bus driver is going to give the report to the Durham local manager, who's then going to relay it to administration.
But administration, not specifically the building principal, but it's going to come back on the building principal. Now, if the administration is fine with that, we can let it lie.
I'm fine with it because there's a lot at times, building principals can't have every single responsibility. However, it does come back on all of us in that case. So to me, I like the way it's being read personally.
Perfect. All right. So we are going to move forward to 443.2, Rule 3, which is being absorbed in 443.2. Board Member Schneider, last page for the night. Any questions or edits?
No, I am fine with it.
All right. Board Member Miller, same question.
I am satisfied.
Excellent. Okay, I have a couple questions. Okay, the School District of Beloit approves the use of video cameras on the school buses for the primary purpose of reducing disciplinary problems and vandalism on the bus. Do we need to clarify by whom? Because I could be a student and I'm recording this for the safety and vandalism prevention of the bus.
So my read of it is when it says the school district of Beloit approves the use, it's like Beloit School District approved. See what I'm saying? So like, I think it's like, this is something provided by the district was my read. Now, I do see what you're saying, but I don't know that there's like enough space in there for me to all the way get there with you.
That is perfectly fine. So here's my question. So is it the mounted cameras that Durham provides?
In a safety situation, naturally, that's what we would want, the cameras that's provided on the bus. However, I would be lying to you if I would tell you that there hasn't been situations in which students who are recording and we find out and we see X on the student phone and that we haven't used or seen, footage that can actually incriminate somebody. I don't know if.
So here's my question, and it's possible I'm overthinking it, but I want to have this conversation so we can just be certain we're saying what we mean. What does it mean to authorize the use of video cameras? Are we saying that's for anybody who has a camera on the bus? If we're going to circle back to them and ask them for their footage, is that us authorizing the use of that? Like, we can't have it both ways. And if footage is used in a negative way, do we see where I'm going? Or is that only the camera that Durham provides that's mounted on the bus? Ms. Shope, you are vigorously shaking your head, and I want to hear what you have to say.
This is actually a policy that I can tell you the history of.
Please, ma'am.
Honestly tell you the history of. So I was working with policy when this one was written.
Yes.
And it was written because Durham, or even the company before Durham, put the video cameras in to record the buses and the students on the buses at the time. And so this policy was written by, I believe, Dick Peterson back in the day, when those cameras were installed to protect the district for videotaping the children on the bus, and then to be able to use that in situations where children were misbehaving or attacking other children or, heaven forbid, other things that never happen in the school district of Beloit. So that I can tell you was the intent when the policy was written, was for only the use of the buses, the video cameras on the buses. That was the intent.
So I'm not on Earth 2 with saying we should clarify what it is that we are approving. Does anyone object to that clarification? I'm going to take your silence as you don't. So the school district of Beloit approves the use of video cameras. Now, who owns that? Because those are Durham's cameras, right? Those aren't our cameras. Is there some agreement that like we have open access to that? How does that work?
That's a good question. I'll go back first because on Monday, I'll get clarity myself as to if they're district cameras or if they're Durham cameras. And that is honestly handled differently district to district. So my last school district that I served, the district bought and had installed the cameras on our contracted bus service. So, there's the question about whose cameras are they? And then that question then will answer the question of whose footage is it also?
And do they sign some type of privacy agreement? So even though they have possession of that footage, and maybe they don't with technology, it's just housed there, but the footage comes to us and bypasses them?
No, the footage is going to be used more by the contracted provider, quite honestly, than it would be by the school district. It's likely that the contracted provider would review bus footage certainly weekly with regards to certain incidents, perhaps even daily.
So do we have some type of privacy agreement that prevents them from sharing that with third parties or et cetera? And I understand if that's nuanced and you need to have a conversation.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Okay.
I don't know that answer.
So I think it is a,
Later in the policy, though.
It's later on in the policy.
Yeah. What you're going towards now. Couple paragraphs now, couple sentences.
okay, let's jump there. Can you show me exactly where you are,
It
please?
said family handbook, second paragraph. Family handbook that the video cameras are being used on the buses and shall be in place at the front of each bus, and the video cameras are being used on the bus. So that tells people.
Right, but that doesn't tell me who owns is it our camera? Is it Durham's camera? Who owns, yeah, that's what I was discussing with him.
sorry.
No problem. Ms. Shope, could you put that on our follow-up to-do list for this policy set? We need to know, one, who owns the camera and who owns the footage, who has access to the footage, and if there are privacy agreements built into that contract.
This says the video shall not be available for viewing by public and general employee, later,
No, I read that, but that doesn't address the
who's, it doesn't address.
whose footage it is or whose cameras there are. All right. So the portion that starts with all buses shall have a front and rear camera. The transportation manager, just for curiosity, who is our transportation manager?
It's Jessica McCoy from Durham Services.
Okay, so the transportation manager or designee shall review okay, so we have that. So we still need to understand who owns the cameras, who owns the footage, but at least we know who's reviewing it. So maybe those privacy agreements just need to be with that person and whoever that person would assign as their designee.
A quick interruption if I can.
Please.
So just dawned on me, I happen to have my transportation folder in front of me, and therein is the contract. So looking quickly, talking about fleet equipment, the contractor shall equip at its sole cost and expense all buses and vehicles with fully operational global positioning satellite systems, yada, yada, yada. And then it goes on to address the contractor shall equip digital video surveillance systems with 2 cameras at its sole cost and expense. The contractor will maintain the entire video surveillance system. The operational records, including but not limited to the audio, digital, and video recording, shall be the exclusive property of the contractor.
So that's not our footage.
It is not our footage, however, it is part of the agreement that we pay for and contract with them.
To have access to it.
Yes.
So, and you may not be able to answer this, that makes complete sense. Since it's not our footage, but as a part of the contract, we have access to the footage, can we tell them what to do with the footage?
It likely continues on. Where do I want to pick up here? The contractor shall provide the district with access to and copies of such footage at any time upon a request by the district superintendent or designee. The contractor shall allow access to the footage by its own employees when necessary.
Which that portion.
Shall not release any footage to any third party without first receiving written approval
There
from
we
the
go.
district superintendent or designee. So
Perfect.
there is language therein.
Well, thank you. All right. So we can scratch that from the list. We know who owns the cameras, we know who owns the footage, and what the parameters of the use of the footage is. All right, perfect. Same paragraph, only the transportation. If we jump down around halfway, if you're looking at the right side, a student being disciplined, there's an extra space there if we could omit that. And I'm just gonna read the sentence. My note said it's kind of awkwardly worded, what's the intent, but let's just work through that quickly. A student being disciplined based on the viewing of a video recording and/or their parents may view that isolated segment of the video that documents the incident for which they are being disciplined if and when requested. I think I get the gist of what we're saying, but I think we can say that less awkwardly. So basically, if a student is being disciplined for something they did on the bus, the parent can request to see an isolated segment of the video that includes the reason for the discipline. Is
Correct.
that
Yes.
okay? Ms. Sho, by chance, did you get that? So if a student is being disciplined for actions taken on the bus, a parent or guardian may request to view the isolated segment of the video for which the student is being disciplined. Is everyone okay with that modification? All right. And that's it. That's all I got. So, Ms. Shope, refresh my memory. Are there things that we're checking on? We got the camera cleared up. In what will now become 443.2, Dr. Garrison, feel free to answer this too, that will require us to hold this over with the committee.
The only thing that I mentioned that was gonna still check what Durham has as a conversation with their
For
driver.
discipline?
Correct.
Okay.
That was my only.
Is everyone fine with keeping this portion of the policy set until we're clear on that discipline piece? All right.
Yes. Yes.
We're not moving, okay, so 443.2 is going to include the content from rules 1, 2, and 3. Those are gonna be retired, but we're not making a move until we can clear up that discipline piece. So it's just gonna stay in committee, and it'll take us 5 minutes when we see this again. Yep.
I just thought with the change you made, of providing verbal warnings to address non-critical, I thought it was moving on, so.
Oh, no, I think the administration wants to do a little more dig. Am I understanding that correct, Dr. Garrison?
That's correct.
Okay.
We do need to know what they're doing.
Okay. Nope, I completely agree. All right, so that brings us to meeting closing. Our next meeting date, forgive me, I don't have it in front of me. We're gonna be at the first Wednesday in October, so that will be October 4th at 5:30. Just to give everyone on policy and anyone who's interested, our preference is to review policies in sets. We understand that sometimes that is not always possible, so how we're gonna move between now and heading to the end of the year is clearing up any policy sets that we've done piecemeal. So making sure that we're keeping language consistent, that it makes sense if we need to collapse rules into policies, we get all of that cleaned up by reviewing this set. So just to give everyone a heads up, Thank you for your patience with that. We will meet again on Wednesday, October 4th at 5:30. All that being said, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All right, there is a motion and a second for adjournment. Is there any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, please say aye. Aye. All right,
Aye.
thank you. That motion passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.